Now, our last town hall focused on general issues impacting the LGBTQ plus community, a community which is represented by every element of society across race, ethnicity, culture, and religion. Now, this week, we are focusing on LGBTQ plus youth and the unique challenges they face with a diverse group of nonprofit leaders, and their work and programs serve this particular community. They each represent organizations leading impactful, innovative programs addressing the critical needs of this vulnerable section of society. So we will hear how these youth fared during the pandemic, their perspectives and impact of recent legislative actions, which are very anti-LGBTQ and anti-trans in nature. We're going to hear a little bit about how youth who are the victims of anti-gay hate crimes are being helped. Also, the state of their physical and mental health and the higher rates of homelessness for this population, among other issues. We're also going to try to find out how these organizations are working with this group of youth to empower them, ensure their safety, inspiring them to be their true selves in the face of adversity and ignorance. And we'll be encouraging youth in this call to help them lead a better future. Now, we will also ask all about their views on how the entertainment and media can help to tell LGBTQ stories in a more authentic way and how their stories can be more mainstream. So I do want to remind everyone that these are discussions. This is conversational. This is an open forum between all of these different people and voices with different experiences. And so we encourage people to add all of their comments. We want to leave viewers informed, inspired, and hopeful. So with that, I'm going to quickly introduce our panel. And when I introduce everybody, I want to kind of wave or say hi so we can make sure the viewers at home and everybody online is knowing who everybody is. So first, we did have a late edition Shannon Parker from Howard Brown and Broadway Youth. Thanks for joining us. We have Stephanie Piccarelli. Stephanie currently serves as the president and CEO of Ignite with more than 20 years working in the social service sector. Stephanie has significant experience leading teams in the areas of housing, youth programming and outreach, workforce development, communications, and support services. Next, we have Luis Martinez. He's a human rights worker with a decade of experience working with youth here in Chicago. He joined the Center in Halstead in 2020. He runs their transitional housing program for young adults, where his goal is to build a safe and welcoming community for LGBTQ plus youth who are experiencing homelessness and housing instability. Bonsai Bermudez, he is a co-founder and executive artistic director of Youth Empowerment Performance Project, also known as YEPP, Y-E-P-P. He completed a master's degree in guidance counseling from the University of Puerto Rico with a concentration on lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex issues. And he has been working in the social justice service field for over 20 years. August Hupp is also our guest. He's the Pride Youth Program Coordinator, whose focus is empowering youth, facilitating conversations about gender, and teaching nonviolent conflict resolution strategies. The Pride Youth Program offers social support and leadership programming for more than 250 LGBTQ youth ages 4 to 24 and their families from across Chicago's northern suburbs. And we have Ted Peso. Ted Peso joined the Knight Ministry in 2008 and is the Director of Strategic. In the role, he leads a team that focuses on advocacy, community engagement, and education. He regularly represents the Knight Ministry in meetings with elected officials and at various neighborhood meetings across Chicago. And this is interesting. In 2020, Governor J.B. Pritzker appointed Ted as a member of the Youth Homelessness Prevention Subcommittee. So we want to make sure everybody knows who's talking. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we have so much to cover in an hour, so we will hop right in. I think we need to start with what's really been in the news lately, which affects a lot of LGBTQ plus youth, and especially trans youth. We know what's going on across many different states. There's been a lot of news about laws and legal actions focused on the LGBTQ plus community and trans people in particular. Many seem to be zeroing in on trans youth, specifically participation in sports and access to healthcare services. So this is a controversial topic. I guess I want to invite anybody who wants to jump in on this, and I'd like to hear from all of you on your opinions and what we think will be next and how important this is.
Hey y'all, I will jump in. First and foremost, I'm so happy to see such amazing colleagues of mine that have been doing this work for a really long time. Thank you all so much for sharing this space with me. Thank you all for having me. I'm Shannon Parker, she, her pronouns, interim director of the Broadway Youth Center and director of community and strategic partnerships at Howard Brown Health. So, to my knowledge, there have been like 8 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been like enacted into law this year alone. And a lot of them, all of them, I'm not gonna say a lot of them, all of them have been totally steeped in the fleecing of the rights and humanity of LGBTQ folks, getting a bit more granularly, trans folks, even more narrowly, young people, right? All the way down from, as you said, Jason, from sports activities to healthcare. We see this really being prevalent in our southern states, right? Like in Arkansas and Mississippi, Tennessee. You know, honestly, I hate to say this, but it's nothing new. I think that what we're seeing right now is folks acting out in fever pitch. 2020 was really revealing because you heard a lot of people saying things like, what's going on? What is going on? I've never seen anything like this before. Well, that's because it was covered. These things are nothing new. It's just that we had undivided attention and the media began to highlight things that were always going on in our backyards. And now we're seeing them front and center. But thankfully, what a lot of folks didn't know is that you had individuals such as the leaders who are on this call today who were well situated to fight against these things in a really feverish way. So I'm going to drop there and let my other colleagues tap in and share their perspectives as well.
Yeah, and maybe a little bit about why trans youth are being targeted.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Shannon, thank you so much for bringing up the point of like this, I think can feel overwhelming, even though, yes, like it's definitely not new. So a thing that I have been talking about and we've been talking about in our program with our young people, I'm sure all of us remember a few years ago, it felt sort of like the political target was on trans young people regarding bathrooms, or really on trans people of any age, but especially on trans young people, right? And sort of using the same fear tactics that are often weaponized against marginalized people in all kinds of ways. And we have a group for trans and non-binary young people in high school in our program called Trans Non-Binary Process Group. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a space for people to come together and have a supportive space to have open conversations about gender, identity, exploration, expression, all kinds of stuff like that. And we always gather topics from young people in that group of like what are they interested in talking about, what's coming up for them, what's important to them. And for our spring session of that group, one of the things that people asked to talk about was the anti-trans legislation that's been kind of popping up all over because people were feeling really upset, feeling really confused, just feeling overwhelmed in general. We were really fortunate to have Grayson Alexander, who is one of the staff for the 49th Ward, come in and do a little bit of sort of like demystifying the legislative process around these bills and contextualizing them. And something that young people told me that they took away from that was Grayson really laid out the some of the like political reason behind these bills, especially in states like Illinois, where, you know, likely these bills might not get passed, right? There's like a ton of bills cropping up, even if, you know, a small but still important number of them actually get passed into law. And just talking more about sort of like the culture of fear behind these bills. They're especially around trans young people. There's often sort of a demonization, right, especially of trans femme young people, and some kind of like adultist and misogynistic undertones of like, we have to protect the poor innocent girls, right? When like young cis women are not necessarily evoking those same ideas or stating that they have fear. We have lots of cis LGBT young people who are, you know, standing right alongside their trans LGBT friends and in solidarity. So I feel like that's a little bit of the sort of conversations we've been having in our program around sort of like, why is this happening? And yeah, giving space for young people to talk about it and learn a little bit too.
Is it okay if I add another piece?
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Honestly, I think even to be in everything you said is absolutely true. I think even more simply put, media, the things that we allow in our homes, the violence that we overlook every day, right? The way that we contextualize violence and always thinking of it to be a physical thing. No, the bad jokes, right? The things that we overlook, the daily disrespect. That's why we see what we see happening in higher places, right? Because we allow it to happen in our day-to-day mundane lives. So when we don't do a great job of interrupting violence in the ways that we can, it creeps up into other spaces. So when you ask that question about, you know, why, that's why, because you have LGBTQ folks who still in many regards are the last acceptable group to laugh at. And so many other of those things. So I think that we have to first ask ourselves, you know, what is it that we're doing on a daily basis that gives space to this and allows for our leaders to believe that they can set these things into motion and we will readily accept them.
How hard is it for any of these children who can't possibly play sports if they're denied that opportunity, or they're denied the opportunity to be who they is? How hard is this for these kids?
I'd like to say a bit about the.
I think it's hard for anyone. I think it's hard for anyone, regardless of whether they're in school and looking to play sports, or you know, they're seeking healthcare and are prevented from accessing healthcare. It's hard for anyone to hear their community or themselves talked about in that context like that, right? I think one of the things that's done for the young people that I've worked with, or that I've seen happen with the young people that I've worked with, is it's gotten them really angry, but also mobilized, right? They're a lot more interested in how the process works, getting involved with the process. It was much easier to engage young people in discussions around the election or in discussions around voter registration than it has been, you know, in any of the almost 15 years that I've been doing this work recently, because they were so upset at what was coming out of our federal government in particular, right?
What do you believe the risk is to children if they are in some of these states and these laws get passed or stay on the books?
Well, I think at YAP, at the Youth Empowerment Performance Project, where I have the honor to you know, be a leader with many of the young people we work with, we talk a lot about trauma, right, and mental health, and you know, young people are in that age of like that self-discovery and discovering themselves, their identities, the world. And when you have a young person in a space, in an ecosystem that is telling them to not be themselves, to not find ways to explore who they are, then it start creating like that trauma, that sort of self-hatred, you know, that trauma that then when they just knock at the doors of our, you know, community centers and spaces, they bring all of that sort of like baggage, and it's pretty intense, you know, and then few years after, then they become young adults, and now you have an adult that is still not in that place to like understand who they are and what they really want to contribute to the world. So it's just a chain reaction of so much harm and so much trauma that until you know yeah and like Shannon said, I think this is leaders are there, young people are there. Um, it's so many initiatives that are happening all the time around us just to like fight against all of these many laws and all of these many politicians that do not understand how to do the work.
And to say something earlier, I don't know if maybe it's based off of your experience, what you've seen with children.
Can you repeat that again?
I know earlier on, Luis was going to jump in.
Oh, I can.
Yeah, if you wanted to finish.
Thank you. Sure. I not to paint too dark of a picture regarding legislation in the country as a whole, but I think the problem we face is not just the prevalence of these new anti-trans bills being passed or proposed, but it's also the stalling of legislation that would or could support the LGBT community, most notably the Equality Act, which for those watching who may not know, the Equality Act is a piece of federal legislation that's been passed by the House, not yet by the Senate, and it aims to improve the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by extending the prohibition on discrimination to sexual identity, gender identity in services and programs like education, employment, and it's back in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was not universally accepted. And right now we're seeing that with the Equality Act. But the fact that it's not yet passed and that this could provide a lot of relief is alarming and disappointing. And I know a lot of our youth are acutely aware of where all of these bills are, and the fact that the Equality Act is stalling. It's problematic, but it's also a call to action to make sure that we are all calling our senators. I know I've already left voicemails on Senators Durbin and Duckworth, their offices, and I encourage folks in other states to do the same because it would provide some relief to this issue. But right now it's stalled.
Right, it could provide some relief because there's a chance that the federal law or the federal act could cancel out some of this state legislation. Stephanie, in your experience, tell me about what you've seen with kids who, want to transition, or they're having these fears of not being able to, or with sports. I mean, I know it's not as much of a problem in Illinois, but I think the overall fear is still there.
Well, one of the things I was going to say, as we work with youth, all youth are creating a foundation for their future during this age range. And, all young people need the same support and love and care and affirmation. And when a young person experiences the opposite of all of those things, not just from schools or public or even from legislation, but we see it in young people's homes where they're turned away out of their homes because of who they are. And it's certainly a huge reason why young people experience homelessness. And I think that it is obviously a call to action for young people to speak up. And I think we see ourselves as supporters of that, to give them the podium to be able to say how they're feeling. But we can't ever lose sight that this is our future, our young people. I mean, they're experiencing the same things that all young people question when they're youth. And so I think that it's more detrimental than just a bill or sports or whatnot. It really runs deep, and we have to be there to stand on the shoulders of people who've come before us to make sure it doesn't get forgotten.
And there's been some talk that many young people are now energized to fight. Maybe if one of you can jump in and talk about what can trans youth do to stop this, even if they're not in a state where it's happening? I'm imagining there's some kind of online coalition or what could be done to make sure that their opinions are heard.
That can be, oh, please, August, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think this is something we've seen just increasing over the past several years, and certainly since just the increased push for action and justice for Black Americans in the past year. Like, young people are fired up and passionate about getting involved and contributing their time and their voices to movements that impact a lot of communities, right? Because like young people who are impacted, Black trans young people are just as impacted by police violence as they are by anti-trans laws, right? And so I think something that I've seen is like, even young people in our state, right, where they're maybe not seeing laws cropping up here that impact trans young people in this state, are still doing all of the things that they always do to support each other, right? Sometimes like medical care is inaccessible for a lot of reasons, even if there aren't explicit laws that say, trans young people cannot access medically affirming care. So they're still, having conversations with each other. Oh, this was what my process was with hormones, giving each other advice, validating, giving each other space to vent about, the barriers that they encounter, financial distance from, places that offer affirming care, right? Insurance, all of those things. So still continuing the very historied legacy of this community and our way we show up for each other. And builds relationships and family outside of blood relations. But I think also I've been seeing young people connecting their own experiences with homophobia and transphobia and broadening their understanding and being like, I want to show up for everyone who's impacted by oppression. I want to show up. I want to make my voice heard, because, right, it's like I can't think of the word. It's like in nature, I think symbiotic, is that the word I'm looking for? Whatever, it's a reciprocal relationship, right? We show up for each other, and then people show up for us when our community is also under attack. And so I think that's a thing that I've been seeing, especially in this state, right? Thinking about other movements that have been cropping up in Chicago and in Illinois at large to bolster the safety and justice for marginalized communities.
Well, and that is something to remember, that the allies are just as important and other young people are just as important too. And that the allies have brothers and sisters who may be dealing with this, or friends or cousins. And so, everybody can speak out. We could talk a little bit more about this issue later too, if we want to bring something else up or if I missed something, but I want to move on now to something. Oh, did you want one more?
Sorry, I think Shannon was gonna also add on to that.
Oh yeah, Shannon, go ahead.
August, I think you really summed it up super well. The only short piece I would add on is to kind of reiterate what you were saying. When we look at critical pieces of youth development, we form our identities through actually sharing space with individuals who reflect ourselves. And one of the most challenging things about being in states that have had some historically anti-LGBTQ or anti-trans legislation is it takes away from spaces like Broadway Youth Center, Ignite, Night Ministry, Central on Halsted, right? It takes away from the spaces that we work in that actually create these safe spaces where young people can actually share experience and actually see themselves, So I was only going to really just add that is that young folks, I think resilience is such an overused word, but again, the power that they have to actually form spaces that are social, to actually support one another and just give each other safe space is really important.
Okay, yeah. So they can definitely be involved in those community groups with those safe spaces. So the stat that really surprised, I guess it didn't surprise or shock me, but it is very high. And we want to talk a little bit about this. Research from the University of Chicago and other research shows LGBTQ plus youth are 120% at a higher risk of homelessness than other children. So the two big questions: why is this happening, and what can be done to solve it?
So I'd like, yeah, I can jump in on that. I mean, what we see with young people who come to us is, you know, a big reason is that there's no acceptance by family or friends. And it becomes a reason, you know, they don't have a place to live any longer because where they're living, those individuals aren't accepting who they are. And, you know, and I will say this too, youth homelessness is really underrepresented in the numbers oftentimes because, you know, young people, you know, couch surf and find different ways to survive when they're experiencing homelessness. And it's not always fitting in a traditional definition of what, you know, our government defines as what experiencing homelessness is. So, you know, most of us really even believe the numbers are higher. I would say over 10% of our young people report that, you know, they've had discrimination and that's what's led them to becoming or experiencing homelessness and, you know, having unsafe housing and whatnot. So,
In addition,
their families and their community.
Yeah, families, friends, their community just not accepting, and they need to find a safe place to go.
I think also in addition to the rejection and exclusion that they might experience in their family units, LGBTQ youth also don't have access to the same safety nets and the same services that their peers would, and so they're more at risk to sort of find themselves with a complete lack of options, and so they experience homelessness at a higher rate because of that.
Louise, I would also say whether you are trans or not trans or LGBTQ or not, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who is between the ages of even 18 and 24 who has it all together where they're able to kind of stand on their own, you know? So with that being said, when we think about the discrimination, you know, the lack of access to stable employment, housing, a living wage, you know, things like that. We know that our community is much more subject to have to do survival work in order to make sure that they even have a subpar place to lay down at night, you know? So those are realities that oftentimes lead to a great deal of homelessness for the population that we serve on a daily.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think that we have to remember that these are young people, and youth homelessness is a result of a really complex set of issues that happen to a family structure, right? So sure, one of the reasons why we see LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness is because of family rejection or because there's not that support in the family. But then, very similar to all kinds of other young people experiencing homelessness, we see things like poverty, loss, violence, addiction, all of those things. So the response also then has to, you know, not only address the family rejection, but all those other challenges that the family is facing as well. And I think, so at the Night Ministry, one of the things that we've seen is at the Crib, for example, which is one of our overnight programs for young people experiencing homelessness, our numbers are much higher than would normally be seen in the numbers that data collection gives you, right? So we see like 46% of our clients pre-pandemic identifying as LGBTQ, and then about 39% said that they identified as trans or gender nonconforming. So I think, you know, that shows the relationship that providers have with young people, and how you know, data collection doesn't really capture the true story of what's going on unless you have that relationship, right?
Yeah.
Sorry about that noise in the background. We're trying to get that.
It says someone needs to mute.
I think at the station, and they are working on that and power through. So, what do we think the solutions would be to get some of these kids? I mean, I know all of your programs and community efforts do the best that they can, but what can we do to help get some of these kids off the street?
I would like to actually answer both, right? Like some of the reasons why the high rates of young people experiencing homelessness within the LGBTQI plus community, and some of the strategies. Yes, I mean, I think this topic is very complex and is multi-layered, and some of the things that people in this call in this broad is yes, 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 and it's a lot more. It's a lot more that we can spend hours talking about it. I think two of the things that I would like to name, right, it's that even the very systems that are designed to support queer youth, LGBTQI plus youth, experiencing housing instability are also the same systems that are bringing a lot of harm. For example, the Dcfs system is a system that is created, right, to support young people that are struggling with some things at family or what have you. And when you look at the Dcfs system, it's pretty transphobic. It's pretty like LGBTQI, anti-LGBTQI. I don't think the Dcfs is really understanding the very specific needs that these specific young people experience, right? and they don't have strategies to address those things. I am a part of the roundtable at the ACLU, the roundtable that talk about how to best support queer youth within the Dcfs system. And for example, we're still fighting to make sure that all these youth workers within the Dcfs system are well trained how to support queer, transgender, non-conforming youth. And the Dcfs system is still not have in place, a strong training opportunity for all of those youth workers. Another thing, and then this is a good segue to talk about strategies. I mean, just all these conversations that we are currently having about policing, and how, for example, the city of Chicago is redirecting, Illinois is redirecting so much money, money to continue furthering, this militaristic city policing, surveillance, all of these many things, and how community centers, healing centers, are being snatched from community, are not well funded, are closing, how school continue closing in Chicago. So I think strategies are everywhere. I will say that one of the things that I want Chicago to do better is to start redirecting that funding to like really spaces, community driven strategies to really address these many issues. One more thing, I think the medical industrial complex and even the non-for-profit industrial complex are also systems that we need to continue learning, like how to best support young people, trans and gender non-conforming young people. I have seen many non-for-profit organizations harming young people very badly. Even organizations that are queer focused, or LGBTQ focused, are the very same ones that are perpetrating a lot of this harm. I think it's a lot of internalized oppression that the LGBTQ community is still unpacking and healing from, and we are treating our trans and gender non-conforming brothers and sisters and individuals very badly. So I can go on and on, but I would like pass the mic to another person.
So you're saying that in your experience, you have seen in some of these groups and even DCFS that people need to be more educated about the needs of LGBTQ plus youth.
Yeah, I think it's a very rooted, internalized oppression and hatred to the trans and gender nonconforming community. So even trainings is just like a strategy, but it's a lot of unpacking, you know, the hatred that is going towards this community. I still, yeah, it's like these legislations, you know, it's just full of hatred to those specific individuals. So I think all the people behind all these different systems and machines, we need to do our personal healing work in ways that our, you know, what we create, you know, can look better, can look healthier.
Any other ideas on how to solve this issue?
I don't know that this is as housing focused as bonsai strategies were, but I really was just thinking bonsai as we were talking about sort of the what you're talking about of like the medical industrial complex, nonprofit industrial complex, right? A lot of these systems that are social service systems that are set up to provide people with supports, resources, and yeah, just like help people out when they're in need. And I feel that oftentimes the barrier that LGBT young people run into specifically, even from places that are LGBT centered or don't think of themselves as people who perpetuate harm against LGBT people, sometimes young people will experience the brunt of that because of just like adultism and the pathologizing of different sexual and gender identities, right? So I think sometimes if people's framework for people being gay, lesbian, bi, pan, queer, or trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary, like whatever, if people's understanding of that is still filtered through this like very Western white supremacist, like colonized idea of that as like othered or like different from the norm, or like kind of like it's like an issue, right? It's like something that it's an issue or an abnormality in this person that, you know, sometimes when it comes to adults, people will be like, well, they're an adult, you know, it's not my business, I'll let them live their life. But when it comes to young people, right, this idea or this framework of thinking about it as this like issue or as a like pathologizing it, that then leads to some of these barriers of access and some of this harm that happens where young people are not, their agency is not honored, their bodily autonomy is not honored. And that's, I think, a lot of times some of this, like I was talking about, the like cultural impacts of some of these laws is really reinforcing a lot of these ideas that like when you go to the doctor, you're not in charge of what happens to your body. You don't actually get to make choices, which is something that impacts a lot of people in a lot of different avenues. But I think in particular, LGBT young people often the barriers they run into from systems that are hypothetically set up to support them comes down to this thing of like, well, you're young and I want to protect you from this like issue I'm seeing. And like, once you're an adult, you know, it's out of my hands, you can make that choice. But while you're a young person, I'm going to put up barriers for you to not have to choose this, instead of seeing it as just the natural diversity of humankind, right? We're all different people, and young people are exploring all parts of their identity. That's part of their development.
Jason, I'll add this really quickly. Simply remember the humanity. Remember the humanity. I will use a personal story. I was a rather young transition, and I remember, my God, it wasn't necessarily celebrated in my household. But one of the things my mother said, she said, when I am on my way home from work and I walk down the street and I see young people, I see folks who are literally sleeping on these streets, what kind of mother would I be to allow that to happen to my child? I do not understand what you're going through. I do not understand the conflict that you're feeling. But what I do understand is that you are my responsibility and you cannot make it on your own, you know? So if there is nothing else that anchors you in that moment, it is the fact that for parents who have stable housing, right? For parents who have the means to provide that level of access to their young people, let that be your grounding, let that be your foundation, your anchoring, that this is a young person. And if by any other circumstance that this would have happened to you, where would you be now? So for me, that is where I will kind of leave that at, is remember the humanity, you know?
Right. And it's too bad that more parents don't think that way. And I also want to kind of go back a little bit on what August talked about with healthcare. So what is being done right now? What are the specific issues impacting LGBTQ youth? And how are you all addressing those needs? Maybe just one or two people could jump in based off of their organization if you're active in this.
Well, certainly the suite of services we want to provide to this constituency includes taking care of their health, providing guidance and support for them to find trusted medical providers whom they will feel safe with, whom they can trust. That's something that a lot of us take for granted, that we will see a medical professional and they'll take us at our word. They'll believe what we say to them. It's not the experience of many of the youth that we work with. So making sure that of all the things, all the challenges they face, that we're talking about their health, that we're, if we're not personally knowledgeable about the specific needs they have, that we're educating ourselves so that we can help them make informed choices that affirm their identity.
Stephanie,
yeah, I can say, one of the things I'll say with young people that we work with, I mean, they really haven't experienced healthcare in general in many planned ways. I mean, most of our young people, didn't experience regular even doctor's visits, health checkups, or even taking care of their health in general. And so, we spend a lot of time talking with our young people about getting basic health coverage and basic health needs met, and then talking about, in whatever place they are in a transition or getting their healthcare needs met, like how to even go through that. But I mean, we start at really kind of a lot of times basic steps of, this is what you have access to. I mean, it's a lot of, they don't know what they don't know about what they have access to when it comes to healthcare. And, I can even say too, even in places like Illinois, where there's greater access to healthcare, there still are incredible costs associated for our young people who are identify as LGBTQ plus. I mean, even if they're there, the services are there, the cost is just very, very difficult to be able to afford.
are you talking about the costs overall, just for?
Healthcare in general, the costs of healthcare in general. I mean, I think that even if a young person is looking to go into therapy and whatnot, I mean, we try to get a lot of our young people into as many programs that they can qualify for, but it's sometimes costs of things can be prohibitive.
And what about, oh, go ahead.
So I think we're really lucky here in Chicago because, for housing providers like the Night Ministry, like COH, like Ignite, we have a great partner in Howard Brown, right? They have a drop-in program, the Broadway Youth Center, that it really does the groundwork of building relationships with young people, so that when we do have to refer them into healthcare, we can say, you can go to Howard Brown and get healthcare, and they're citywide, right? So geographically, it's really easy for young people to get there. So so having that, like building those relationships, they're at the core of the Night Ministry's work, but with the partners that we have too, they're at the core of their work too. So there's a lot of trust when we do have to refer a young person for medical care, that our partner providers will take care of them, and the young people trust that. So
yeah.
And I want to talk a little bit about educating young people about HIV. May 18th was recognized as HIV Vaccine Awareness Day, but 40 years after AIDS was discovered, we still do not have an effective HIV vaccine. Although obviously we all know about the treatments, it's managed. There's also PrEP There's medicine out there that helps prevent it. But I guess my question to you all is, what can be done to youth so they really understand and know how much of a risk this still is? Is this a problem? Do they understand it? It's not the same as when I was growing up. I feel like there may not be that same sense of urgency or fear over it anymore, like the 80s. So I don't know if anyone wants to about address that issue.
Jason, that's a great question. Oh no, please go ahead.
Thank you. We would definitely, I think I'd get agreement in this group by starting off with saying that we definitely wouldn't want to provide guidance, support, education from a point of fear. That's not really productive and doesn't, especially in the youth I've worked with.
Right. I mean, people shouldn't be fearful, but be aware of it. But I, expressing the feelings when I was growing up.
Oh, of course. Yes, but it's an important distinction to make that we want our youth to make informed decisions about everything from safer sex or even drug use without providing any further stigmatization by just eliminating something like a sense of fear. Or urgency is important, but I believe that youth can get to that place if they have the information. We can trust them to make the right choices if they have an education. But that's the first point I would want to make with respect to efforts that traditionally were made in the past. We wouldn't want fear to enter into the equation.
Yeah, I would. So working at Howard Brown, as you said, Ted, we do our primary care largely revolves around HIV, AIDS care and prevention as well, right? So to the first half of your question, do I feel that young people take HIV less seriously than they would have, let's say, 20 years and beyond? I wouldn't say that. However, I will say that destigmatization campaigns have been incredible when it comes to educating young people, when it comes to being much more embracing and supportive to their communities and to individuals, and not only that, but to themselves who are living with HIV. Now, going back to the fact that these are young people, we would be hard pressed to find a young person, regardless of orientation, regardless of identity, who does not participate in a certain amount of risk behavior. All we can do is simply arm them with the tools that they can utilize in order to best protect themselves, whether that is PrEP, whether that is condoms, whatever other means that may be PEP, right? Post-exposure prophylaxis. Again, it's really about maximizing the options, but also making those options accessible to young folks. That's one of the things that Howard Brown Broadway Youth Center definitely does pride itself on. We're really great. We're really happy to see that folks in our communities are not looking at HIV/AIDS like they did 20, 30 years ago. Those are great strides. It is important, however, as providers, that we are reminding folks that, hey, while you can live a long, full, healthy life, we want to make sure that you are making the most informed decision possible to keep yourself safe. So again, it's really about not scaring young folks, right? We want to empower them, because that's a part of moving into that independence, that autonomy, is when they're able to make informed decisions, they're able to make empowered decisions, but are also able to take care of themselves regardless of what their statuses may be.
Right, and it's just making the best decisions with the tools.
Yeah, right.
Now, obviously, we know that we're still in a pandemic. Things are starting to get back to normal, but we're still in a pandemic. How are LGBTQ youth still affected by COVID-19 and the pandemic?
That's a tough question. Anybody? Where do we begin?
I mean, I guess just what are you?
I think that
anyone wants to talk about a personal experience.
I think the burdens and the risk of the pandemic have been shouldered by different communities differently, and it does tend to feel like society at large is looking at this in the rearview mirror, but we're still feeling it in the community I work in. It's still an urgent issue. Vaccinations haven't reached everyone. I've been very fortunate in my program to get most of our participants vaccinated, but I mean they're still needing to work in, you know, tight indoor spaces where there's more risk of transmission. They still don't have as much healthcare as one would like to make sure that they are reducing the likelihood that if they did get COVID, that they wouldn't have serious medical issues. So it's still an issue. It might still be an issue for the next year because it's affecting different parts of society differently.
I'm not gonna diminish COVID in any way, shape, or form, but I think my colleagues here could speak to the fact that the population that we serve who are in such crisis on a daily, I'm not gonna like rank COVID versus needing to eat versus needing a place to sleep. But I tell you, it's kind of another thing when it comes to the young people that we serve. Again, these are young people, but I will say in terms of our proactiveness at Howard Brown, we have brought COVID vaccinations and testing to the communities that we serve, right? Because to believe that folks are going to say, oh, let me go get tested for COVID, or oh, let me go get my vaccine, I'm going to walk into this clinic. It's kind of naive thinking, right? Maybe even privileged thinking. But rather instead, you know, we have actually taken mobilization to the communities, to community centers, to neighborhoods, to do our best to ensure that this does happen. You know, I think about COVID as another pandemic amidst the many pandemics that we're enduring, whether those are like literal pandemics or pandemics of isms, however you want to put it, you know. There's a lot of things that we still need to conquer.
And even the ongoing pandemic of violence and violence against LGBT.
Absolutely, Jason.
Into trans. We're, you know, starting to run out of time, not quite yet. I do want to touch base on that a little bit about the violence. Is there anybody that wants to share a personal experience or what you've seen or what's being done to stop or prevent violence?
I can share a little
big
bit.
Loaded question.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to ask a loaded question. I just want to kind of hear what you guys have to say about this issue, because I'm sure it still is a huge issue.
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to tie a few things that I have not shared earlier in the conversation. I mean, HIV, and Shannon, thank you so much for, you know, sort of like describing it. You know, COVID is just one pandemic out of many different pandemics, and the HIV is one of those, right? I don't think we. Yes, it's a lot of HIV prevention programs and efforts and what have you, but I'm not sure how much like this country is really redirecting what is needed to make it more balanced about what needs to happen around HIV, for example, because the rates, the statistics among young people experiencing homelessness of HIV is pretty high. They are getting infected. And even though some stigma is, you know, they are like addressing some of that, and they feel more comfortable sharing their stories as HIV positive young people, but it's people are still getting infected pretty highly.
It sounds like it's intertwined.
Yeah. So
and violence too.
Yeah, and connecting with the violence, and sort of like, I think something that is still, I mean, we have been exploring this for 10 years and we will continue exploring it. It's like how to really center the community most impacted by any of the issues we want to address or dismantle, HIV, or, you know, sort of like violence or kind of violence, like how to really center that community most impacted by those, and and listening to them, like what would be the best ways to really address these things, you know? When we talk about HIV, you know, we have a curriculum developed by 3-4 HIV positive staff members like 4 years ago. And they designed, you know, they designed something that was very rooted into what they wished to have when they were young people back in the days, being HIV positive. So I think when we talk about physical violence, when we talk about police brutality, when we talk about gun violence, you know, I think the people most impacted by those specific issues, how to sit down, listen. I think it's a lot of strategies and ways that they have that I don't think, you know, politicians and people in power, executive director from different organizations are really listening and implementing those within their curriculums, within their programs, within their services. Yeah.
Ted, have you worked with clients or heard stories, or, I mean, obviously we know this is happening, but what have we heard? Any examples or?
So I think the research out of the University of Chicago tells us that, you know, young people who experience homelessness, who identify as LGBTQ, tend to be more at risk of violence than heterosexual young people experiencing homelessness, right? And so I think, like Bonsai said, we really have to listen to those young people, and then as organizations, it's our role then to kind of try to respond to those suggestions by creating services that respond to them, right? And so whether that be from an advocacy perspective, whether it be from a programmatic perspective, I think the one thing that we hear continually from young people is that you know, more police are not the answer, right? Young people are very involved in the discussions around police reform in our city, and more police do not make them feel safe, right? So so how as a city are we listening to young people and responding?
So I want to end on a little bit more of a higher note here. I know that we have about 3 minutes left. We know that network shows with LGBTQ plus storylines are becoming more and more popular. Characters, actors, they've been winning critical acclaim and recognition. Still not a lot of main characters represented in the LGBTQ community. I think there's Batwoman, from what I know of, is the only main characters. How about go around and talk about your thoughts on this, and or maybe a favorite show that you have that represents the community. We'll start with Ted. And if you don't have a show.
So I really enjoyed Pose because it reminded me a lot of the stories of young people when I first started in this work, and just kind of learning about like their stories and how it differed from communities that I grew up in. I thought that was a really great, I thought it was really wonderful to have those stories introduced, right?
Stephanie?
You know, I think that what I've really enjoyed, actually, everyone may laugh. I don't watch a lot of television anymore because I've gotten, I really read and have been, you know, get all my news from online and whatnot. And I don't even watch television very much anymore. But what I will say is that what I've learned the most about is reading stories. I'm a huge follower of Humans of New York. And I don't know if any of you are a follower of Humans of New York, but what that photojournalist has done to tell stories of young people and just the LGBTQ community at large has been so incredible and so empowering. It's really one of my favorite things to watch and follow and read about.
And of course, whatever the medium is, when young people see these characters in the mainstream, they feel like, oh, I see myself. And so that's why we're talking about this and why it's August. Anything to add?
I was really struggling to think of something because the first thing that came to mind was Pose also, because I think that show has just been like a light. The Disclosure documentary, talking about like trans representation in media. I think I heard a lot of positive feedback from young people, and I think Shannon made a point earlier about like violence being more than just physical, right? That like violence in the way that people are talked about and people are seen and portrayed, and the way that young people are able to see their own futures as like possible or bright or like there. I think Disclosure did a really great job of sort of like talking through, you know, what the impact of representation really can be beyond just like, oh, there's a trans person or a queer person in this show, but also getting to see, you know, narrative shift from these sort of like dark, very like violence ridden stories to trans and queer people, you know, in the future, trans queer people with families, children,
Right.
trans queer people alive.
And we do have to wrap up. It is 3 o'clock, but that is good. I think the takeaway is we want more and more of these characters to be represented to inform and motivate young people. So we hope our viewers found this conversation interesting. We thank all of you who spent the hour with us. This is our Chicago. We are all Chicago, and we all have a responsibility to one another. Once again, thank you all for your time. Happy Pride.
Thank you all. Happy Pride.
Thank you, folks.
you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Hi,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Bye.